The day my 70-year-old husband married his first love, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply walked into their wedding banquet, holding 3 truths in my heart. Truths that would shatter the fantasy they built and remind the world of the woman they tried to erase. Everyone called it a love story. 2 high school sweethearts, torn apart by time, reunited in their golden years. They said he was brave for choosing his heart, and I was bitter for not letting go. But no one asked what I gave up for that man. No one wondered what happened to the woman who stood beside him for 40 years, through jobless winters, through raising a daughter, through every birthday he forgot. This isn't a story about revenge. It's about remembering. It's about a woman who refused to be written out of her own life, even if it meant standing alone. When I got the wedding invitation in the mail, I thought it was a mistake. The name on the card was Richard, the same Richard I'd been married to for 42 years. And beside his name, in elegant script, was Elaine, the woman he once told me was just a friend from the past. My hands trembled, not from heartbreak, but from disbelief. Because just 2 months ago, Richard was still sitting in the kitchen with reading glasses on, grumbling about my overcooked eggs. Now he was a groom again, beaming in a custom-tailored suit, ready to marry the woman he claimed he'd never stopped loving. Our daughter, Emily, slipped into my living room that evening like nothing had happened. "Dad's finally happy," she said. "He deserves this. And so does Elaine. You had him for long enough, Mom." I wanted to ask her what long enough meant. 42 years? 3 miscarriages? A lifetime of missed dreams? But I didn't say a word. I just smiled, because I had a plan. And when I walked into their wedding that Saturday afternoon, I wasn't there to cause a scene. I was there to give them a gift. One wrapped not in ribbons, but in memory, truth, and every sacrifice they chose to forget. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon, tucked in a pale ivory envelope, tied with a satin ribbon, and addressed with perfect cursive handwriting. At first glance, it looked like a thank you card or a church event flyer. But when I opened it, I stopped breathing for a second. Inside was a formal wedding invitation. "Richard Thompson and Elaine Carter request the honor of your presence at their wedding ceremony. Richard Thompson, my husband of 42 years, and Elaine Carter, the woman he once told me he barely remembered from high school." I sat down at the kitchen table, the invitation trembling in my hand. The ink hadn't even dried on our divorce papers, yet here he was, preparing to walk down the aisle again, with someone he used to love, someone he never truly let go of. What hurt the most wasn't the wedding. It was that I hadn't even been asked how I felt about it. No conversation, no closure, just a new chapter for him, while I was left behind like the final page of an old book. That evening, my daughter Emily came over, carrying a casserole dish like nothing had changed. She placed it on the counter and casually said, "Oh, and by the way, Dad's getting married next weekend. He sent you an invite out of respect." Out of respect. I wanted to laugh or scream, maybe both. But instead, I asked her one question. "Emily, do you think this is okay?" She shrugged, not meeting my eyes. "Dad's finally happy, Mom. He's doing what his heart tells him. You had him for a long time. Maybe now it's someone else's turn." That sentence? It pierced deeper than the divorce itself. It reminded me of something I'd heard years ago in a small support group for older women going through separation. One woman had said, "When a man starts over, they call it brave. When a woman finally speaks up, they call her bitter." I never forgot that. Because in that moment, sitting at my own kitchen table with a wedding invitation from my ex-husband and a daughter who no longer saw me as anything more than the past, I realized something. Sometimes you're not written out of the story. You're just erased quietly and expected not to notice. That night, I lit a candle. Not for Richard, not for Elaine, but for Amanda, the woman I used to be. And I made a promise. I wouldn't storm their wedding. I wouldn't scream or cry or fall apart.
No.
I would walk in, smile politely, and give them a gift far more powerful than revenge. 3 truths. 3 moments of clarity. 3 things I had carried in silence for far too long. Because sometimes The greatest power we have is telling the truth in a room full of people who never expected us to. And to understand why those 3 truths mattered so much, we need to go back. Back to a time when Amanda gave up everything so Richard could have everything. Before I was Richard's ex-wife, I was Amanda, the girl who gave everything so he could chase his dreams. We met when I was 21, and he was 22, young, broke, and full of ambition. Richard had just been offered a chance to study at Harvard. The only problem? He couldn't afford it. His family had no money, no connections, no way to get him there. But I did. Not because I had money, but because my father did. And he saw something in Richard. He said, "That boy has a brain. He'll go far. Help him, and one day, you'll have a good life." So we did. My father co-signed the loan. I dropped out of college after 1 year. I took on 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to keep the lights on while Richard studied, read, and talked about changing the world through policy. When he graduated, I expected him to say thank you. Instead, he said, "Now it's time for me to build a real future. You'll take care of the home. That's just how things work." And I believed him, because back then, I thought that's what love was. Giving without asking. Supporting without needing praise. I was the housewife. The one who made lunches and mended shirts and paid bills and drove our daughter to school and stayed up late budgeting groceries down to the penny. I kept our little world running so he could chase success. And he did. Oh, did he succeed? Tenured professor, best-selling author, guest speaker at conferences. People called him visionary. He called me just Amanda. He never brought me to events, never introduced me to colleagues. He once said, "It's not that I'm ashamed of you. It's just you wouldn't fit in." I laughed it off, until one day, at his retirement celebration, one of his colleagues asked, "So, where's the professor's wife? Has she passed away?" I stood 5 feet away, holding his coat, and Richard didn't correct them. That was when I realized something painful. The world never forgets men who succeed, but it often forgets the women who made that success possible. You see, housewives don't get awards. We don't get articles written about us. No one applauds when we unclog the sink at 2 a.m. or spend 5 hours on the phone fighting with insurance companies. We do the work no one sees and then get blamed for being invisible. And yet, I never once asked for more. Not until he left. Because when Richard walked out the door to marry his true love, he wasn't just leaving a marriage. He was leaving decades of sacrifice. He was abandoning the woman who turned her life into a foundation for his. And everyone clapped. Everyone smiled. They called it romantic, but I call it what it was, convenient. He rose. I stayed. He became somebody. I became nobody. But here's the truth I wish more women knew, especially those who've spent their lives putting others first. Being selfless is not the same as being small. Your worth doesn't disappear just because no one claps for you. And on the day I received that wedding invitation, I remembered all of it. The years, the choices, the quiet moments no one ever saw. I didn't want applause, but I wasn't going to be erased either. Because before Richard and Elaine could walk into their new beginning, they needed to remember the past they so quickly buried. And that began with the 3 truths I carried for far too long. I used to think that love meant lifting someone higher, even if it meant staying behind. So when Richard got into Harvard, I didn't hesitate. I gave up my own college dreams without a second thought. I told myself, one day, he'll come back and teach me everything he's learned. And for a while, I believed that. He'd send letters filled with big words and big ideas. I'd read every one slowly, sounding out the syllables, looking up words in the dictionary. He once wrote, "Amanda, I'm learning things I wish I could teach you in person. Someday I will." But someday never came. When he returned with his degree in hand, things had changed. His eyes no longer lit up when he saw me. His words turned sharp, clinical. He began saying things like, "You wouldn't understand, Amanda. You've never studied this." Or worse, "How can I bring you to academic events when you haven't even read the basics?" He stopped offering to explain things, stopped including me in conversations with his colleagues. And slowly, his education, the very thing I had worked night shifts to support, became a wall between us. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I should have kept reading. Maybe I should have taken night classes, or picked up a book while Barry napped, or watched the news more often instead of folding laundry. But the truth is, I was never allowed the space to grow. Every hour of my day was wrapped around someone else's needs. And every time I tried to take a moment for myself, I was met with guilt or dismissal. What are you reading for? That won't help you cook dinner. If you have time for books, you have time to clean the fridge. His education, once a shared dream, became a sword. Not to protect us, but to cut me down. It was no longer about love. It was about power. And I've learned something important. If someone uses what they've learned to make you feel small, that's not intelligence. That's control. I didn't want a degree on the wall. I just wanted to feel like I mattered. But in Richard's world, you only mattered if you had titles. You only had value if someone clapped when you spoke. And me? I was just the woman who packed lunches and made sure the bills were paid on time. That was all until I stopped being useful. Then suddenly, I was boring, outdated. Not on the same level. So no, I wasn't shocked when he left. I was hurt, but not surprised. Because for Richard, love had become a transaction. And once the debt was paid, he was free to leave. And yet, there was still one person I thought would see me. One person I believed would always be on my side. Our daughter. Out of everything that happened, the divorce, the betrayal, the wedding invitation, nothing hurt more than hearing my daughter say, "Mom, just let it go. You've had him long enough." Emily was my only child, the one I carried through 2 miscarriages and a high-risk pregnancy, the one I stayed up with through chickenpox, heartbreak, and college applications. I gave her everything I had, my time, my energy, my quiet little dreams I kept on hold until later.
I thought that meant something.
So when she stood at that wedding, dressed in pale blue, Elaine's favorite color, and handed the bouquet to her father and his new bride, my heart didn't just crack. It caved in. When she saw me there, standing near the entrance, she didn't hug me. She didn't whisper, "Are you okay?" She just sighed and said, "Mom, please don't make a scene. You're embarrassing yourself. This is Dad's day. He deserves to be happy." I looked at her, my own daughter, and wondered, when did I stop being Mom and become just a shadow from her past? And the answer came swiftly. It happened slowly, quietly. In all the moments I said yes when I wanted to say no. In every sacrifice I made for the family that never got noticed. Emily had grown up watching her father shine and her mother fade. When she told her friends about her family, she mentioned his lectures and published books. She never mentioned the woman who kept the lights on, or who skipped meals so Emily could go on field trips. Once, when she was 16, she asked me why I never had a career. I smiled and said, "Because I chose to build a home." Now, I wonder if that sounded like weakness to her. You see, in today's world, especially in places like America, where independence is everything, housewives are often seen as relics. Unambitious, dependent, invisible. But what people forget is that invisible work is still work. And love, in its truest form, is service. Quiet, steady, uncelebrated service. Emily had been raised in comfort, but she never saw the cost. She loved her father's status because it gave her a name in her own circles.
And Elaine?
Elaine was a writer, a woman with fans, followers, and books on shelves. Of course, she seemed more impressive, more motherly. But here's what I want every woman to know. Your worth is not defined by what your children can brag about. It's in the way you showed up when no one else did. That day, as Emily tried to give me cash to leave quietly, I looked at the child I had raised and realized she wasn't a child anymore. She had made her choice. And maybe, just maybe, that chapter between us had to end so we could begin again someday with honesty.
But not today.
Because before I could ever heal that wound, I had to speak the truth I had swallowed for decades. The kind of truth that doesn't just hurt, It changes everything. People say the truth sets you free, but they forget to mention. Sometimes it also burns everything down first. When I walked into Richard and Elaine's wedding banquet, I wasn't wearing black. I wasn't trembling with rage. I wore soft gray, the same color as the sky before a storm. People turned their heads. The music didn't stop, but the air shifted. I walked slowly, calmly, not to cause a scene, but because I knew what I was about to say would change the room forever. Richard saw me first. He tensed. His grip on Elaine's hand tightened. "Please, Amanda," he said, "don't ruin this day." I smiled. "I'm not here to ruin anything," I said gently. "I'm here to give you both a gift, the truth." And then I told them 3 truths I had kept buried deep inside for far too long. Truth 1. He didn't earn his education alone. I reminded Richard, and everyone in the room, that the only reason he went to Harvard was because my father gave up his entire retirement savings to help him. Money meant for our family's future. Money that sent him off to become a man of greatness, while I stayed behind. "You used to tell your students that you came from nothing," I said. "But you didn't. You came from my everything." There were murmurs, side glances, some uncomfortable shifts in chairs. But I kept going. Truth 2. The marriage ended long before the divorce did. After our daughter was born, Richard and I stopped sharing a room. He said it was to focus on his research. But the truth? There was no research, just distance. I lived in the same house as him for 20 years, and not once did he reach for my hand. Not once did he ask if I was okay. He needed a cook, a cleaner, a presence to complete the picture. "You are already married to her in your heart," I said, nodding toward Elaine. I was just the placeholder. Elaine looked away. Richard's jaw clenched, but neither denied it. Truth 3. The affair didn't begin after Elaine's husband died. It began long before. I found the letters once, tucked between the pages of his old chess books. They weren't signed with names, but I knew her handwriting. The flowery cursive, the subtle perfume on the paper, and the way she said, "I wish things had been different." They called it a reunion of lost love, but it was really a relationship built on secrecy and stolen moments. A fantasy preserved while the reality of marriage, me, the house, the family, was ignored. When I finished speaking, the room was silent. No one clapped. No one cried. They just sat there, processing. Because the truth, it doesn't scream. It whispers. And when it's real, people listen. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a drink. I simply said what needed to be said. And then I walked away. Here's the thing. The truth isn't always beautiful, but it is always necessary. For decades, I told myself it was better to stay quiet. That silence meant peace. But peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's just the slow erosion of your spirit. And that day, in front of everyone, I took myself back. Pause for a moment. If you were in Amanda's shoes, after giving your youth, your dreams, and your love to someone who walked away without a second thought, what would you do? Would you speak your truth in front of the crowd? Or would you walk away in silence? I'd really love to know how you feel about Amanda's story so far. Leave a comment below and tell me, have you ever stayed silent when you should have spoken up? Or maybe you finally found the courage to stand tall like Amanda did. Your voice matters here. Let's talk. I didn't plan on going viral. I didn't even know how to edit a video. But after that wedding, after speaking those 3 truths out loud for the first time in decades, I knew I couldn't just go home, pull the curtain shut, and pretend none of it had happened. So, I did what any 65-year-old woman with a broken heart and a borrowed iPhone would do. I recorded a video. Just me, sitting on the porch. No makeup. No filter. No script. I didn't shout. I didn't point fingers. I just talked. Talked about how I gave up my future so someone else could have theirs. How I traded textbooks for grocery lists, college dreams for carpools, and love for loyalty that was never returned. And then I ended it with the one line my lawyer told me to say. I don't want him back. I just want what I'm owed. I hit upload, closed the app, and went to bed thinking no one would ever see it. But by morning, my inbox was full. My phone buzzed nonstop. And the video, that quiet little truth I filmed in my old sweater with birds chirping in the background, had over 1 million views. It turns out, people were listening. Women my age commented, "That's my story too. I just never had the courage to say it." Younger women wrote, "This is why we fight for financial independence. This is why we don't give up our names, our dreams." Even men joined in. "My mother went through this. I wish I could hug you on her behalf." I was stunned, because for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. It made me realize something important. Sometimes, the loudest power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from telling the truth, quietly, honestly, and without apology. In a world obsessed with filters, with curated lives and picture-perfect families, my simple story cut through the noise. It reminded people that betrayal doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes, it comes with polite dinner parties and carefully worded divorce papers. And that the women who stay silent the longest are often the ones carrying the heaviest truths. But of course, not everyone celebrated the video. Because when the truth makes waves, some people scramble to stay afloat. And in this case, those people were Richard and Elaine. They weren't just embarrassed. They were angry, because the fairy tale wedding they had painted so carefully was starting to peel at the edges. For the first time in my life, strangers were defending me louder than my own family ever had. My video had struck a nerve. Thousands of comments poured in. Women, men, even teenagers writing things like, "She's not bitter, she's brave. She raised a daughter and a husband, and they both forgot her worth." It felt surreal. But just as quickly as the tide came in, Richard and Elaine began scrambling to build a dam. First came the article. Written by a close family friend, it painted Richard as a quiet scholar who had suffered in silence for years in a marriage to a woman who controlled every aspect of his life. Then came the post from Emily, "My daughter. My father has always been gentle, respectful, and patient," she wrote. "My mother has always had a strong personality. Honestly, he was never allowed to be happy until now." She even wrote, "He didn't cheat. He just found love again. At 70. Isn't that okay?" I stared at her words, blinking back tears. Not because they hurt, but because I realized she truly believed them. In her version of the story, I was the villain. The loud woman who kept her father from his dreams. The woman who took too long to let go. That's when I learned another truth. When someone no longer needs you, they rewrite who you were. And sometimes even your own child holds the pen. I wanted to scream, to remind her of the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays, the birthday cakes from scratch, the way I held her through heartbreak after heartbreak. But to her, those memories didn't weigh as much as Elaine's book signings and gentle voice. Elaine was polished.
Published.
Was just
Mom.
The media started spinning the story. Some headlines were kind, others not so much. One even read, "Jilted housewife turns bitter after husband finds love again." People started taking sides. And just like that, the world was split into two camps. Those who saw me as a woman reclaiming her story, and those who saw me as a bitter ex trying to drag everyone down.
It was exhausting.
But here's what I want you to know. The truth doesn't need everyone to believe it. It just needs you to stop hiding from it. Even when your child turns their back. Even when the crowd cheers for the other side. Even then, it's worth standing tall. Because silence might make you more likable. But it'll never make you feel free. And just when I thought I was standing alone again, someone unexpected reached out. Not a fan, not a stranger, but someone with the power to change everything. Just when I thought the world had turned its back again, a message appeared in my inbox. It was short, polite, but heavy with weight. "Hi, Mrs. Amanda. My name is Patrick Wilson. I'm Frank's nephew, Elaine's late husband. I believe I have something you might want to see."
I paused. Frank.
The man Elaine had been married to for almost 40 years, until his sudden passing just 6 months ago. A kind, quiet man who adored her and, apparently, never suspected a thing. Or maybe he did, because what Patrick sent next changed everything. It was a collection of photographs. Old, grainy, clearly taken discreetly from the edges of doorways, behind curtains, through the lens of someone who wasn't supposed to be there. And in every single one, there they were, Richard and Elaine, holding hands, sitting too close, sharing smiles that no just friends ever share. One photo in particular made my stomach turn. It was dated almost 15 years ago. Elaine and Richard meeting at a hotel, while Frank was still alive, while I was still folding Richard's shirts and making his favorite soup every Sunday. I called Patrick immediately. His voice was calm, but heavy. I should have said something years ago, he admitted. But Frank loved her. He never would have believed me. And after he died, I thought maybe it didn't matter anymore. But it does, I said, my voice shaking. It matters now. Because for so long, Richard and Elaine had painted their story as a beautiful second chance. Two star-crossed lovers finally reunited. But the truth? It wasn't fate. It was betrayal. Well disguised, patiently played, and deeply rehearsed. Patrick agreed to record a short video, explaining everything. He spoke with quiet sadness, not anger. I never wanted to hurt anyone, he said. But good people shouldn't suffer in silence, just because the world loves a prettier lie. When the video went live, it was like flipping a switch. Suddenly, the narrative changed. People remembered Frank. They saw through the carefully curated image Elaine had crafted for years. And Richard, well, the admiration he'd once basked in began to wither. Here's the lesson I took from that chapter of my story. Sometimes, truth needs a witness. And sometimes, the person who steps up isn't the one you expected, but the one who still remembers what decency looks like. In a world full of carefully edited lives, a few unfiltered photos brought clarity. A simple voice, Patrick's, brought justice. And as the support poured back in,
so did the consequences.
Richard's university, Elaine's publishers, even their social circle, all began to quietly distance themselves. But the biggest blow wasn't public at all. It was private. And it came the night they showed up on my front porch. It was just past sunset when I heard the knock on my door. I opened it to find Richard standing stiffly on the porch, his hands jammed in his coat pockets. Beside him, Elaine, eyes red, shoulders hunched, holding a crumpled tissue in one trembling hand. They both looked like the world had collapsed around them. And maybe, in some ways, it had. Elaine took a step forward first. Her voice was thin and shaky. Amanda, please. I can't take this anymore. The hate, the judgment. This wasn't supposed to happen. Behind her, Richard cleared his throat. If you'd just stop fueling the fire, he muttered, maybe we could all move on. You've made your point. I stayed silent. Because some moments don't need loud answers. Just steady eyes and a backbone that's taken decades to grow. He sighed again. Look, if you want money, fine. We'll figure something out. Just leave Elaine, out of this. He still slipped up, calling her by the name he used back when she was someone else's wife. Old habits die hard. Then came the final blow. If you stop all this, I'll come back. We can go back to how it used to be. For a moment, I truly didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Back to how it used to be? When I cooked meals for a man who no longer spoke to me. When I slept in a cold room while he played chess at Elaine's house. When I carried the weight of a family that never once asked how I was doing. No, thank you. I looked him in the eye and said quietly, the day you asked for a divorce, Richard, was the day I stopped considering you my husband. This isn't about revenge. It's about respect. Elaine tried again. This time, she dropped to her knees, right there on my porch. Please, Amanda. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. But I knew better. This wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear of losing status, of growing old alone, of being exposed for what she truly was. Not a hopeless romantic, but a skilled manipulator in a silk blouse. I gently nudged her aside. Not with cruelty. just enough to stand firm. "You don't have to kneel to me," I said, "but don't kneel to your own lies either." And then came the text.
Emily.
"Mom, I heard they came to see you. Are you talking again? Dad says he's apologizing." I stared at the screen. Not once did she ask how I was doing. Not once did she say, "I'm sorry for what I said." Just more spinning, more narratives, more performance. And I realized I wasn't part of their family story anymore. But I was finally writing my own. Here's the lesson I want to share. Letting go doesn't mean you've lost. It means you've finally made room for peace, for truth, and for yourself. I didn't scream. I didn't slam the door. I simply turned, walked inside, and didn't look back. Because sometimes dignity doesn't come from what you say, but from what you refuse to accept anymore. And as I sat on my couch that night, the porch light still glowing behind me, my phone rang one last time. It was my lawyer. "Amanda," he said, voice bright, "they've signed. The divorce is finalized. And with the settlement, you're finally free."
Free. Such a small word.
Such a big feeling. I always thought freedom would feel loud. Like fireworks. Like applause. Like someone handing you a medal that says, "You made it." But when I signed those final divorce papers, when the lawyer said, "It's done," freedom didn't roar. It whispered. And that whisper said, "Now what?" With the settlement money, I could have moved anywhere.
Somewhere shiny.
A new apartment in the city. A cruise. A quiet condo near the beach. But instead, I bought a little plot of land in the countryside. The same place where I grew up. The same soil where I first learned how to tend to things. With love, with care, with patience. This time, though, I wasn't planting a marriage. I was planting tomatoes. I built a small farmhouse with a wide porch and open kitchen. Started a tiny restaurant that served garden-fresh meals. Eggs from my hens. Herbs from my own garden. And pies. Oh, the pies. Apple, blueberry, peach. Each one handmade. People started coming. Then coming back. Not for fame, not for gossip, but for something gentler. Something real. A group of older women started joining me on weekends. Some were widows.
Some were divorced.
Some just lonely. We cooked together.
Talked.
Shared stories we'd never dared say aloud. And I realized this was the life I'd been trying to build all along. One where I wasn't a background character in someone else's success, but the main character in my own piece. One afternoon, a young woman stepped into the restaurant with wide eyes and a hesitant smile. "Are you Amanda?" she whispered. The brave divorced grandma from that video." I laughed, really laughed for the first time in weeks. She told me my story had helped her leave a toxic relationship, that it gave her hope that starting over wasn't just possible, but beautiful. And that was when I finally understood. Sometimes, the loudest legacy you leave isn't in titles or trophies. It's in the quiet ripple your truth creates. Richard? He lost his university contract. Elaine's books were pulled from shelves. Emily, well, she went quiet. Maybe someday she'll come around. Maybe not. But for now, I've let go. Because I've learned you can't force people to value what they've never truly seen.
But you can choose to value yourself.
So, if you're listening right now, maybe you've stayed silent too long. Maybe you've felt invisible. Maybe you gave too much and now you're standing in the ashes, wondering what's left. Let me tell you this. It is never too late to begin again. Not at 30. Not at 50. Not at 65. And especially not when you've finally remembered who you are. You're not just a wife. You're not just a mother. You are a whole story, waiting to be told. And maybe today is page 1. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of Amanda's story. Her journey reminds us that no matter how old we are, no matter how long we've been silent, it's never too late to speak your truth, to stand your ground, and to reclaim your worth. So, here's the question I want to leave you with. What did you take away from Amanda's story today? Did it stir something inside you? Did it remind you of someone? Please share your thoughts in the comments. I truly love hearing how these stories make you feel. If Amanda's courage inspired you even just a little, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There are so many more stories coming your way. Stories of strength, redemption, and the quiet power of the human heart. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and never forget your own worth.